The bullet meant for Marcus Sterling's chest would have killed him instantly. It was already in flight, a .45 caliber round that could punch through armor, when she threw herself in front of his mother. The impact knocked the stranger backward with brutal force, and Marcus felt the world collapse into a single, crystalline point of rage. Blood bloomed across her silk blouse in a spreading crimson stain. Behind her, his mother screamed his name, and everything else became irrelevant. He'd never seen her before. Not until 12 minutes ago, when she'd walked into his penthouse with his mother's catering consultant, helping carry platters for the charity dinner. She'd been radiant, curvy, stunning, with long, dark, wavy hair that caught the light and bright blue eyes that held a quiet intelligence. The kind of woman who drew eyes just by existing. The kind of woman that made men forget their carefully constructed empires. Now she was bleeding, and the 3 assassins who'd breached his supposedly impenetrable fortress were about to discover what happened when someone tried to take his mother from him. Except she was already moving. The woman spun toward the gunman with a fluidity that suggested this wasn't her first encounter with violence. Her hand came up, something metallic flashing, and she fired without hesitation. No panic, no fear. The gunman's shoulder exploded in a spray of crimson, his weapon clattering to the marble floor. Marcus watched, momentarily stunned, as she repositioned herself between his mother and the other 2 assassins, her breathing controlled, her body language that of someone trained extensively in combat. She moved like a predator, efficient, lethal, absolutely professional. "Get behind me," she commanded his mother, her voice steady and low. "Marcus, I assume you handle the one on the left?" Handle. As if they were discussing something mundane. As if she hadn't just taken a bullet meant for someone else. He was moving before his brain caught up to what his body already knew. That this woman, this absolute stranger, had just inserted herself into his world in a way that meant everything was about to change. Marcus Sterling was not a man accustomed to surprises. At 38, he controlled nearly every variable in his life. The Black Mafia, king of one of the most ruthless empires on the East Coast, didn't survive by leaving things to chance. But this woman, she'd just rewritten every calculation he had. He moved with lethal efficiency, disarming the assassin on the left with a precision that left the man gasping for breath on the ground. His hand was a blur, combat instincts honed over 2 decades of warfare taking over completely. Within 40 seconds, all 3 men were neutralized, their bodies scattered across his penthouse like broken toys. Silence fell over the space. The kind of silence that came after violence, heavy, profound, and absolute. "Mom, are you hurt?" Marcus turned to his mother, his dark eyes scanning her carefully for any sign of injury. Evangeline was pale but unharmed, her hand trembling as she reached toward the woman who'd saved her life without hesitation. "I'm fine, baby. I'm fine." His mother's voice shook with adrenaline and shock. "This woman," she came out of nowhere. She was so fast, so brave. Marcus turned his full attention to the stranger. Blood soaked through her shoulder where the bullet had grazed her collarbone, but her eyes remained clear, assessing, almost professionally detached. His gaze traveled from the top of her dark wavy hair down to her curves, undeniably intensely feminine, with an elegance that transcended conventional standards, and back to her face. She was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that probably stopped traffic regularly. Her plus-size frame held an inherent grace that spoke of softness and strength in equal measure. Her blue eyes held intelligence and something else, something that suggested her presence here wasn't random. "Who the hell are you?" His voice came out rough, dangerous, the voice of a man used to getting answers. She lowered the gun she was still holding, her hands moving with practiced ease as she checked the magazine with professional familiarity. "Someone who just saved your mother's life. We can do introductions after I stop bleeding on your designer floor." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a physical sensation that was both unwelcome and impossible to deny. Whatever this feeling was, it was dangerous. "You're hurt," he said, moving toward her without asking permission. He carefully drew her blouse away from her shoulder, examining the wound with the clinical eye of someone who'd seen significant trauma. The bullet had grazed her collarbone deeply, leaving a wound that required immediate medical attention but wasn't life-threatening. Still, she'd taken that hit meant for his mother. She'd made a conscious decision to shield someone else with her own body. "I've had worse," she said quietly, her composure remarkable for someone actively bleeding. That single statement raised about 50 new questions. His security team was already flooding in, having been alerted by the gunfire. Marcus held up a hand, freezing them in place. "Lock down the building. No one in or out without my personal approval. Medical team here now. Move fast." His gaze returned to the woman. She was studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed in a way he typically reserved for the most sensitive business negotiations. "I'm going to need your name," he said, his voice dropping into that dangerous register again. "Sienna Cole." She extended her right hand formally, her left still holding the gun with a familiarity that suggested she could use it in her sleep. "Your mother invited me to the dinner. She's been helping my younger brother get his life together, trying to help him find direction. Your mom thought it would be good for him to see her community, to understand what's possible when you make the right choices." Marcus didn't shake her hand. Instead, he watched as his personal medical team entered the penthouse and moved toward her with practiced efficiency. She didn't resist, didn't flinch when they carefully removed her blouse and began working on her wound with precision. "You're trained," he said, making it a statement rather than a question. The evidence was overwhelming. Her movement patterns, her tactical positioning, her absolute composure under extreme duress. "Federal agent," she replied, her voice steady even as they cleaned the wound and applied antiseptic. 3 years undercover with the Russo family before I went private security. That was approximately 2 years ago when I transitioned out." A federal agent, a former undercover operative with the Russo family. His mother had somehow, impossibly, invited a woman with extensive tactical combat experience to serve appetizers at his charity dinner. And this woman had just inserted herself between his mother and a bullet without a single moment of hesitation. Marcus turned away, but not before something sharp twisted through his chest, something he recognized as the beginning of obsession. He'd built his empire on the principle that everyone had a price, that loyalty was temporary, and that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Sentiment was weakness. Protection was leverage. Emotional attachment was a fatal vulnerability. But this woman, Sienna Cole, beautiful and curvy and bleeding on his marble floor, had just fundamentally altered the very foundation of those beliefs. His mother appeared at his side, her hand gripping his forearm with surprising strength. "She didn't have to do that, Marcus. She didn't even know me, but she moved without thinking. She just did it." He watched as Sienna's eyes fluttered slightly, just barely perceptible, when the medical team applied antiseptic to her wound, the only sign of discomfort she'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. Her hand remained loosely at her side, her breathing controlled and measured. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice low and directed entirely at Sienna. "Why would you risk your life for a woman you just met?" She met his gaze, and for a moment something raw and honest passed between them, something that suggested they were both people who understood the weight of violence and the choices that came with it. Something that said they operated in worlds where most people didn't dare to venture. "Because she's your mother," Sienna said simply, with an honesty that seemed to strip away all pretense. "And because some things matter more than self-preservation. Some people are worth the risk." The words landed in the silence between them like a grenade, and Marcus felt the last carefully constructed wall in his chest crack significantly. It wasn't just the words, it was the absolute sincerity behind them. He'd spent 18 years building an empire, building power, building control, building a world where sentiment had absolutely no place, and loyalty was measured in bodies and territory gained. He'd built himself into an unstoppable force, a man so fearsome that his name alone could make enemies tremble, and allies bow their heads in respect. And it had taken 12 minutes and one beautiful stranger to make him realize how fundamentally hollow all of that was. "You're staying here tonight," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And tomorrow you're going to tell me everything about why a federal agent, a private security operative, risked her life to save my mother. Because nothing about this situation is coincidence, Sienna Cole." Sienna's lips curved upward slightly, amusement dancing in her blue eyes. "Possessive much?" And there it typically defined his world. She'd proven herself to be something different entirely. "Is there a problem with that?" Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous in a new way. A way that had absolutely nothing to do with combat and everything to do with the unexpected, unwelcome, and impossible to deny attraction he was already feeling. "No," Sienna said, meeting his gaze steadily. "No problem at all." Marcus Sterling, Part 2. The guest suite. Marcus assigned to Sienna was larger than most people's apartments, a sprawling sanctuary of marble and silk with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. She stood at those windows for hours over the next 3 days, her mind running through protocols and contingencies that were becoming increasingly complicated with each passing moment. She hadn't known about the hit on Evangeline Sterling. That was the first problem. Her intelligence had suggested Marcus himself was vulnerable, that his position atop the empire was contested by the Russo family remnants looking for vengeance. The idea that they'd target his mother had never factored into her calculations, which meant her calculations were wrong, or someone was feeding her bad intelligence, or, and this was the scenario that made her blood cold, someone within the agency wanted her to fail. By the second day, she'd stopped trying to maintain professional distance. Evangeline had claimed her for shopping, for meals, for long conversations about life and faith and the importance of finding people worth protecting. She'd dressed Sienna in designer clothes that emphasized her curves, insisted on luxury that Sienna had never allowed herself, treated her like a beloved daughter rather than a stranger, and Marcus watched with an intensity that suggested he was cataloging every detail of her existence. The knock on her door came at 2 a.m. on the third night. She was still awake, still standing at the window, her shoulder throbbing in that particular way that suggested the pain medication was wearing off. "Come in," she called, knowing it was him without needing confirmation. Marcus entered like he owned the room, which technically he did. He wore a black shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the edges of his chest tattoos. His neck tattoos were visible in the low light, intricate black and gray designs that spoke of both artistry and intentionality. He held 2 glasses of what looked like exceptionally expensive whiskey. "Thought you might need this," he said, extending one glass. She took it, careful not to let their fingers brush. Already, proximity to Marcus Sterling was doing strange things to her carefully trained nervous system. Couldn't sleep? Something like that. He positioned himself beside her at the window, far enough away to respect her space but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I had my tech team pull comprehensive records on you. Sienna Cole, 30 years old, Chicago native, Army combat medic before you joined the Bureau, decorated operative, clean record. Disappeared from federal databases 2 years ago when you went private." She sipped the whiskey. It was exceptional, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and turned to face him. "Are you confirming my identity or interrogating me?" "Both," he said simply. His dark eyes held hers without wavering. "Because nothing about tonight makes sense. You came with my mother's assistant to a charity event and somehow, you were positioned perfectly to take a bullet meant for her. That's either the most incredible coincidence I've ever encountered, or you were already here for a reason." Sienna chose her words carefully, knowing her response would set the trajectory for everything that came after. "Your mother invited me because I've been working with her community center. She knew about my background in security and asked me to attend. As for the rest, instinct. I recognized the threat signatures of the men entering the building before shots were fired. My body moved before my brain had time to overthink it. It was close enough to the truth to pass a polygraph test, which was all that mattered right now." Marcus swirled his whiskey, his tattoos shifting slightly with the movement. "My mother is convinced you're an angel sent by divine intervention. She's called me 3 times since the incident wanting to ensure you're comfortable. She's also decided that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "Your mother is kind," Sienna said carefully. "My mother is naive about certain things," Marcus corrected. But there was genuine affection in his tone, raised by a pastor before she married my father. He was a good man, but not a gentle one. After he died, she tried to compensate by seeing good in people. "And you?" Sienna asked, meeting his eyes directly. "What do you see when you look at me?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Marcus turned to face her fully, and something shifted in his expression. Something that suggested he was abandoning his carefully maintained distance. I see a woman who's trained in combat, who carries herself like someone used to danger, who put a stranger's life before her own safety without hesitation. His gaze traveled slowly down her frame, and Sienna felt heat bloom across her skin. I see someone beautiful and intelligent and dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with weapons. I see someone who's going to fundamentally change everything I thought I understood about power and loyalty. That's a dangerous way to look at people, she whispered. I'm aware. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently brushed a strand of dark hair away from her face. His touch was tender despite his reputation for ruthlessness. I'm also aware that everything I've built, everything I've been trained to believe matters, suddenly feels very small when I look at you. Sienna's breath caught. She'd encountered predators before, men willing to kill without hesitation, men who viewed the world as a chessboard and human beings as disposable pieces. Marcus Sterling was all of those things, but there was something else in him too. Something that suggested underneath the power and the control and the ruthlessness, there was a genuine capacity for emotion, which made him infinitely more dangerous to her equilibrium than any actual threat could ever be. You don't know me, she said quietly. No, he agreed, but I know myself. And I know that in the 20 years I've been building this empire, the only times I felt anything approaching peace were when my mother was happy, or when I was ensuring everyone under my protection was safe. He paused, his dark eyes intense. Meeting you has fundamentally altered my understanding of peace. He kissed her then, not gently, but with the intensity of a man claiming something essential. His hand came up to cup her face, and she found herself responding with a desperation that surprised her. For 3 days she'd been maintaining barriers, keeping emotional distance, trying to protect herself from exactly this. It took 30 seconds of him kissing her for all of that to become irrelevant. When they broke apart, Sienna was breathless. This is a terrible idea. The worst, Marcus agreed, pressing his forehead against hers. Which is why I'm not giving you a choice. You're staying. You're going to the gala my mother is planning, and you're going to let this, whatever this is, happen. You can't just demand that. I can and I will. His arms wrapped around her waist, drawing her against his chest. I've spent 20 years demanding things and getting them. I'm not about to stop now, especially not when it comes to you. The gala happened 4 days later. Sienna wore a flowing emerald gown that clung to her curves perfectly, a dress that cost more than her first car. Her long dark wavy hair was styled in loose waves down her back, and when Marcus first saw her descending the stairs of his penthouse, something profound shifted in his expression. You're absolutely stunning, he breathed, extending his hand. She took it, and he immediately drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. His hand settled possessively on the small of her back. Everyone here is going to know you're mine. I'm not a possession, Marcus. No, he agreed, his dark eyes intense. You're infinitely more important than that. You're a choice. Every decision I make from this moment forward, every empire decision, you're part of that calculation now. The gala was held at his penthouse, the entire floor transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and power. Members of the empire were everywhere. Men and women who controlled territory, who brokered deals, who answered to Marcus Sterling and his absolute authority. They erupted from the balcony level, coordinated, professional, the kind of violence orchestrated by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The crowd scattered in panic, but Marcus immediately moved, pulling Sienna down and shielding her with his body. Stay with me, he commanded. Sienna's training kicked in immediately. She oriented herself, identified the threat vectors, and realized what was happening. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a test, a challenge to the Empire. She pulled her weapon from her clutch. I'm protecting what matters, she, them. Marcus's security responded, but Sienna's training was sharper, her instincts honed by years of federal operations. When it was over, 14 assassins lay dead, and Sienna was standing in the center of Marcus's living room with blood on her dress and a weapon still gripped in her hand. The silence was absolute. "You're not a private security consultant," Marcus said quietly. They erupted from the balcony level, coordinated, professional, the kind of violence orchestrated by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The crowd scattered in panic, but Marcus immediately moved, pulling Sienna down and shielding her with his body. "Stay with me," he commanded. Sienna's training kicked in immediately. She oriented herself, identified the threat vectors, and realized what was happening. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a test, a challenge to the Empire. She pulled her weapon from her clutch. "I'm protecting what matters." She moved with tactical precision, her shots devastating and exact. 3 assassins fell. 4, 5. Around them, Marcus's security responded, but Sienna's training was sharper, her instincts honed by years of federal operations. When it was over, 14 assassins lay dead, and Sienna was standing in the center of Marcus's living room, with blood on her dress and a weapon still gripped in her hand. The silence was absolute. "You're not a private security consultant," Marcus said quietly. "No," Sienna admitted.
"I'm federal."
"I came here with a mission to gather intelligence on you." That was the assignment. She expected anger. She expected betrayal. She expected him to order her removed immediately. Instead, Marcus crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and kissed her, hard and desperate and absolutely essential. "You just saved my mother's life again. You just proved to every member of the Empire that you can fight beside me, that you're willing to protect what's ours. Marcus, I came here to bring you down." And instead, he interrupted, his hands framing her face, "You fell in love with me. I can see it in your eyes. I feel it in every decision you make." Sienna's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back for days. "I love you. God help me, I do." "Then marry me." The words came out like a command, absolute and non-negotiable. "Become my wife. Become queen of this empire, because the moment you took that first bullet, you became essential to me. And I don't do temporary." He dropped to one knee, pulling an emerald and diamond ring from his pocket, a stone that matched her dress perfectly, a ring that must have cost more than most people's homes. "Marry me, Sienna Cole, be my queen. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve." Around them, the Empire was watching. Evangeline was watching from behind security, her hand over her mouth in absolute shock, and every person in that penthouse understood what was about to happen. Sienna looked at the ring, at Marcus, at the Empire watching their future unfold in real time. She thought about her mission, her handler, the federal agency waiting for her to complete her assignment, and she made her choice. "Yes," she said, and the penthouse erupted in celebration as Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger. Evangeline rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, pulling them both into an embrace. "I knew it. I knew from the moment you saved my life that you were the one. My prayers were answered." Marcus wrapped his arms around both his mother and his fiancée, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt something he'd thought was long dead, complete, absolute, vulnerable peace. The Black Mafia King had found his queen, and the Empire, understanding the significance of what they'd witnessed, bowed in respect. Because sometimes, the most powerful love stories were written in blood and sacrifice, where a woman risked everything to save someone else's mother, and a king was willing to give up his empire for her. Where a beautiful plus-size queen could stand beside her black king, and together, they could rule everything. They erupted from the balcony level, coordinated, professional, the kind of violence orchestrated by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The crowd scattered in panic, but Marcus immediately moved, pulling Sienna down and shielding her with his body. "Stay with me," he commanded. Sienna's training kicked in immediately. She oriented herself, identified the threat vectors, and realized what was happening. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a test, a challenge to the Empire. She pulled her weapon from her clutch. "I'm protecting what matters." She moved with tactical precision, her shots devastating and exact. 3 assassins fell. 4, 5. Around them, Marcus's security responded, but Sienna's training was sharper, her instincts honed by years of federal operations. When it was over, 14 assassins lay dead, and Sienna was standing in the center of Marcus's living room, with blood on her dress and a weapon still gripped in her hand. The silence was absolute. "You're not a private security consultant,"